Hello YouTube. Today I just want to start out and say that I don't know if I might be making videos after this for a while or not, because I've been busy with school lately, and next week is finals week, so it might be some time before I make another video. But what I want to talk about today is Minnesota, and that's the state that I live in America. And I want to talk about Minnesotan culture and language, mostly language, because if you haven't noticed, I have obviously a Minnesotan accent, and my English sounds different than other dialects. My accent and maybe some of the words I use. In Minnesotan English, there are, I guess you could say, maybe 3 phrases or 3 words that we use a lot. That's kind of, I guess you could say, unique to our dialect, and we definitely use them a lot. And you often see them in movies where they're trying to portray Minnesotans or the Minnesotan accent and that type of stuff, and our little funny sayings and our culture that we have that's unique from different states in the United States. And there's a movie, pretty famous movie here in the U.S., I guess you could say, and it's called Fargo. Fargo is a city that's on the border between, I think it's North Dakota and Minnesota, and that's the name of the movie. And most of the movie is based here in Minnesota. And see, just the way we say Minnesota is part of our accent. So Fargo is a movie based in Minnesota, and well, in that movie they obviously they try to mimic the Minnesotan accent and the phrases that we use. So I'll post a link, annotation, or maybe a link below to the trailer of that movie. So if you're learning English or just kind of interested in different dialects in English, maybe you could check out that movie and hear what Minnesotan sounds like, and what our culture is kind of like, and what Minnesota looks like. Now, if you notice, one of the key things about the Minnesotan accent, just besides our phrases, just the way we speak, is we speak pretty monotone a lot of the time. I kind of tend to be, I guess, more tony than most Minnesotans, but I was watching a video. It's a video by Loki, and I can't remember which video it is, but he was talking about, I believe it was tones, tonation, tonality in language, and he was talking about French, and how when French usually is pretty flat. It doesn't have fluctuating tones. It's like one flat line, and that's one sentence is the same tone. Usually Minnesotan is like that. It's really flat toned, or maybe it might have a little spike where a word or two might be a little bit higher than normal. And also we tend to do maybe a little bit of this type action, or where it kind of slowly goes down in tone in a sentence, or maybe it goes up a little bit type deal. But for the most part, Minnesotan's flat toned. I mean, it's pretty flat toned. And I'm going to talk in more of a Minnesotan accent in this video, just for the fun of it. And one thing too I want to mention is my dad's side of the family is mostly from northern Minnesota. So you have Minnesota is I'll show you a picture on this book. That's what the shape of the state looks like. And with Minnesota, we're in the middle of the United States, and we're at the top, so the top middle. So all above here is Canada, over here is Wisconsin, and over here is North and South Dakota, and underneath us is Iowa. And the Twin Cities, which is St. Paul, Minneapolis, the 2 biggest cities, are about right here in Minnesota, in this area. That's where you have the big cities and the suburbs. And I live about right here in this part of Minnesota. But my dad's side of the family is more from up here. And when you, in northern Minnesota and southern Minnesota, they differ a little bit. Like, here it starts to sound a lot more like Canadian English. A lot more like what maybe a Steve Kaufman, more like his English in some ways. And down here it's kind of, I guess you could say more like the general standard American accent. Like if you look at Iowa underneath and maybe a little bit of Wisconsin, this kind of central area of the United States is what they consider pretty much the standard accent. Most of the people that they hire for like movies or movie trailers, that where they have that voice, it says, "Coming in theaters next spring, the super action-packed film with explosions and awesomeness." You know how they got narrators like that in movies. And actually, the top grossing narrators, or the ones that make the most money, who are the highest paid, are from Minnesota. Because we have, the southern Minnesotans have a more general accent, I guess you could say. Whereas in northern Minnesota, where my dad's side of the family is from, it's more Canadian up here in this top part. And sometimes, since I live down here, but I have influence from up there, and I often go to northern Minnesota, I pick up some of the word pronunciations from northern Minnesota. So I'm kind of mixed. Like one thing that people always make fun of me for, or always at least point out to me, is when I say similar instead of similar. Similar is more what they say in southern Minnesota, and that's more of the standard English. But in northern Minnesota, they a lot of times say similar instead of similar. So that's one thing there. And also, I've had people tell me that I sound like Sarah Palin, who's she's a Republican politician, I believe, here in the United States, and she's from Alaska. So when you get into the northern more states in the United States, they tend to have this kind of accent, you know, kind of more northern type, I guess you could say. Or like in the South, they speak differently, you know. Like one thing that I noticed, I went to Missouri, and Missouri's not even really the deep South. Missouri's kind of in the middle of the United States, and even there, I mean, to us Minnesotans, it sounds like the South. Even Iowa to me sounds like the South. But I was in Missouri one time, and I was at like a information desk for it was kind of for like events, or if you want to buy tickets to go to shows and that type of stuff. And they asked me, they go, "What interests you?" Kind of like that. And I was like, with the accent, that I can't do the accent quite right. It's much thicker than that. But what interests you? And I was like, what? And it finally clicked in my head. She was saying, "What are you interested in?" And in Minnesota, we would say interested or interested. What are you interested in? But they say, "What interests you?" Type deal. So, I mean, there's definitely differences, and even when you go down into Iowa, I mean, to me it sounded almost like a southern, pronunciation. Like we say for automobile or car, we say vehicle, but in Iowa they say vehicle instead. Or we say vehicle, they say vehicle. Kind of type deal going on, or that kind of threw me for a loop when I was visiting some relatives in Iowa. They kind of speak differently, kind of more of a southern type accent, I guess. More southern than Minnesota, of course, but to a Texan it wouldn't sound southerner at all. So yeah, today I wanted to show with you guys some different some things about Minnesotan accent, our culture, and some phrases and things that we say a lot in Minnesota that's unique to Minnesota. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that where did our accent come from? I mean, why does Minnesota have this unique sound compared to other states? And I mean, everyone knows that languages change over time and they all evolve separately, just naturally over time they change. And I mean, that's definitely part of it. I'm not going to ignore that, but I'm going to talk about some of the big influences that happened on Minnesotan, the accent. What are the big influences? And you have to keep in mind that, you know, America was a country before Americans were here, in the sense that Native Americans lived here first, and this is their land, and it was stolen from them. But a lot of the, like, I guess you could say, tribes that have lived in Minnesota, as far as I know, I'm not an expert or don't claim to be very good, very knowledgeable when it comes to Native American history or tribes, but in Minnesota, the two, I guess you could say, big ones were the Lakota, like the Sioux, and you had the Ojibwe, and they're also called Chippewa, that existed kind of in Minnesota. And I believe I have a video here on YouTube. I'll have to post a link or an annotation to it, where I went to a powwow. And a powwow is a Native American like festival or gathering, and there the guy spoke Lakota, I think it was Lakota. And while he was speaking Lakota, he was speaking it with obviously a Lakotan accent. So you can see how similar the Lakotan accent is to the Minnesotan accent when you you know, check them both out. If you saw Lakota, Minnesota, kind of sound similar there, don't they? Minnesota is actually a Native American word, and I believe it means like land with many waters or something like that, or many waters under sky or something like that. I'll look it up and I'll put it on here with annotations. But and a lot of town names in Minnesota are Native American in origin. But so we got a lot of influence from the Native Americans that were originally here. And then also, if you look at Minnesotan geography, where I live, I'll show you again with this handy dandy outline of Minnesota. Where I live down here, it tends to be kind of a lot of, I guess you could say, grassland and plains. You know, mostly people in this area tend to do farming, you know, grow corn, crops like soybean or wheat, or, you know, different crops, and a lot of farming happens in this part. But if you go over down here, you get a lot more. It's kind of like a line that goes across right here. You get hardwood forests, and hardwood forests are like the real kind of leafy trees. And then the more you go to like the rest of Minnesota over here and up here, you get a lot of the pine forests and the pine trees and stuff. So when you kind of look at Minnesota, the way Minnesota looks, it looks a lot like some of the more Germanic countries in Europe. And keep in mind, Canada is right above Minnesota. So when white people first came to Minnesota to start settling it, a lot of them came through Canada too, not just across America to get to Minnesota. In fact, my mother's side of the family, which is mostly Norwegian, well, I guess you could say like 98% Norwegian, I mean really Norwegian, they came from Norway, they went to Canada, they went to South and I believe North Dakota, and then from there some of us came to Minnesota. So, you know, there's lots of different routes that the first white people came to get to Minnesota. And most of the people who settled in Minnesota were from Scandinavia, and they were from the more Germanic type countries and some of the Slavic type countries. So a lot of, and then like I said, Canada was right above us, so we had a lot of French Canadians that came to Minnesota too. But if you go into like the more northern Minnesota and northeastern Minnesota, by like Lake Superior and that type of stuff, and they have a lot of kind of hilly stuff, and they do a lot of iron ore stuff there. You get a lot of Norwegian and Swedish people up there, and you get a lot of French up there too, because you know the French come down from Canada. So Norwegians, French, Finlanders, you get a lot of Finlanders there, and So a lot of the street names and town names and stuff, because I have a little bit of knowledge of Norwegian, because my family's Norwegian, still speaks a little bit of Norwegian every once in a while. I can understand some of the town names, what they mean, and some of the street names and stuff. And also, there's a lot of German people too in Minnesota. Like the southern part of Minnesota, you get a lot of German people. So there's a lot of influence from those languages that they had in Minnesota. For instance, a real common phrase that you'll hear in Minnesota is oofda. Oofda, and that's like, oh man. Like, sometimes when I sneeze, I'll go oofda. Like, whoa, that was a big sneeze. Oofda. Or if I'm lifting something heavy, I'll go oofda. Oh, that's heavy. Type deal, you know. And so oofda comes from Norwegian. And in Norwegian, it basically means, oh man, you know, basically like what everyone else would say in English. Oh man, and I think in German they say Mensch. You know, Mensch. So, we have that in our language, and that's, you know, it's kind of starting to die out now with the young people. But since my family's Norwegian, it's something I picked up, and I still say, and I love the word. But mostly older people say that, and another big probably influence is our food too. Our food is a lot like Germany, a lot like Norway, a lot like Sweden, and a lot like Finland. And one big thing that we have here is Lutefisk. And Lutefisk is it's Norwegian for live fish. And lye is a chemical. It's actually poisonous. But when you make this type of fish with lye, and you know, after the whole process is done, it's not poisonous anymore. But basically, it's kind of a strange way they do it. But I think they put fish with lye in like a bucket of water, and they let it sit for a long time, and that fish absorbs the lye, and the fish gets all poofy, you know, because it absorbs the water too. And I guess over time the lye becomes kind of not poisonous anymore, and then I guess they kind of dry the fish out or make the lye come out of it or something, or some water, so it's not quite as full of water. And then it's kind of like a mushy, kind of really strong flavor fishy taste to it, and it's called Lutefisk. And a lot of people you know, eat that like on holidays, especially like for Christmas and stuff here in Minnesota. Lutefisk is kind of like a common thing you might find at like a cafe where they tend to have more like comfort foods. They'll have Lutefisk. And you can go to Norwegian stores, which there are a lot here in Minnesota, and you can buy Lutefisk. And Lutefisk is something that came from Norway. Really, in Norway they don't eat it anymore. It was kind of like a trend, like a fad that they had in Norway for a little bit, and then at that time is when the Norwegians were coming to America, to Minnesota in particular a lot. And so they brought the Lutefisk with them. Except the Lutefisk stayed popular here in Minnesota, whereas in Scandinavia, not so much. Like whenever real Scandinavians come to Minnesota nowadays, people bring up Lutefisk, and they're just kind of like, what? I think I know what you're talking about, but that's what some old people eat, type deal. Is what they do, or you know, either that or they've never even heard of it. And Lutefisk is spelled like this: Lutefisk. Fisk being fish, Luda being lie. So lie, fish. That's Lutefisk. And I got this book, the one that I've been using the map, and it's called How to Talk Minnesotan. And they have a particular section here on Lutefisk. So I was gonna see what it says about Lutefisk. Lutefisk, where is it? Lutefisk, there we go, page 59. It says Lutefisk. It says, "Note, I'm sorry that I have to mention Lutefisk in this guidebook. Sorry for myself. If I don't mention Lutefisk, the critics will jump me for the glaring omission. But if I do mention it, as I am doing right now, they'll jump me anyways for stooping to such a thing. But my obligation is to you, the reader. How can I let you travel to Minnesota totally ignorant about Lutefisk?" That's what he says. And, you know, since we have a Norwegian culture where we talk about Lutefisk, we also have a lot of jokes that are based around Norwegians and Swedish type culture and stuff. And it says a few reluctant words about Lutefisk jokes. It's debatable whether Lutefisk really belongs in the food section of this guide. Lutefisk is sold by the ton as food in Minnesota stores. Sure, but we don't eat it all that much. It's mainly brought home for its humor potential. Things that smell can of course be funny, and Lutefisk does smell, like it smells really fishy. It says, but Lutefisk doesn't just smell, it emits a powerful invisible gas. It can be debilitating to the novice. What that means is, like I said, Lutefisk is made from lye, which can be poisonous, but it's not poisonous after the whole process is done and you eat it. But Lutefisk has a very strong smell and taste, and if you've never experienced Lutefisk before, it's definitely something that might take you off guard because it's such a foreign thing. It says, at some point in your visit here, you will be told a Lutefisk joke by a Minnesotan. It would be a good idea to laugh. Well, not actually laugh. What we do is make noises in the throat and snort. You know, because we're just kind of funny that way. What we do, don't try it until you've heard it. At the end of a week here, you'll probably not only be snorting at Lutefisk jokes and choking like a pro, but you'll have a repertoire of 30 or 40 classics. So, let's see if I can... Okay, here's a Lutefisk joke. It says, you know what a Minnesota millionaire is? It's a Norwegian with a safe deposit box full of Lutefisk. That's a type of Lutefisk joke. You see? So, yeah, the Lutefisk is kind of, it's something funny that people joke around about, and it's part of our food, and it's one of those Scandinavian influences that we have in our culture. Just kind of like oofda is. But also, one important phrase probably is you betcha, or you bet. I'll just keep it at that. You bet! Exclamation point. You bet. And you bet is something we say in Minnesota. Sometimes we say, oh, you betcha. And ya is kind of like you. Like, oh, you know, don't ya know? And it's kind of like, don't you know? You know? So it's you bet. And you bet is kind of like sure, yes, in response to a question, or it's just a simple way to say I agree. I agree. So you bet. And there's some examples in this book that I'll show you. He said, you bet is probably one of the most important things to know about Minnesotan English. You bet. He says, this one is going to be an example in an airport. It says, we found your suitcase. It got caught in a conveyor belt. Some of your underwear fell out and it was shredded by the pulley. Otherwise it's okay. We taped the handle back on it. It should last ya. Oh, thanks. Oh, you bet. But your dog is another matter. We think he's on the plane to Kansas City, but no problem. We'll find him. I appreciate that. You bet. So, in this way, you bet is also you saying you're welcome to thanks. So it also means you're welcome. You're welcome. So someone came up to me and they said, thanks for teaching me that thing, you know, or thanks for helping me with homework, I'll go, oh, you bet, or you betcha. That's one thing that we as Minnesotans kind of say. And another way to use you bet is, let's see. Oh, okay. Warm enough for you? You bet. You know, is it warm enough for you? You say yes. You say you bet. Or if someone says like a sentence where they're giving their opinion on something, if you say you bet afterwards, that means you agree with their opinion. So if someone says, I kinda like flannel pajamas, you'd say you bet. Like I like them too, type deal. Or this humidity sort of gets to you. You'd say you bet. Minnesota is known for being really hot and humid during the summer. It says, the heat I don't mind, but it's the humidity. You bet. So, that's real funny way to say it. You know? And then another phrase that we have in Minnesotan is, it's the opposite of you bet, I guess, in a way. And it's, that's different. That apostrophe, because it means that is, that's different. And that's your way of saying, I don't agree with that, but I'm not going to get into a debate or a conversation over it. See, in Minnesota, one thing that's kind of part of our culture is if you have strong opinions about something, you keep them to yourself mostly. So if you use something that's kind of weird or strange, or some weird opinion that you don't like, you just say, oh, that's different. So I'll give you some more kind of uses of you betcha and that's different. Say, suppose you use night crawlers for bullheads. You bet. What'd you use? Stinkbait. I make it out of rotten hamburger and moldy cheese with oatmeal for a binder. Well, that's different. And just in case you don't know, night crawlers is something we say a lot in Minnesota. Night crawlers is let's see, I'll write this down. Night crawlers. And what night crawlers are is they're a worm. They're like an earthworm. So they're just simply worm. Like the kind of worm you digging in the ground that you might find. And a bullhead is a type of fish that we have here in Minnesota. One thing that's big on Minnesota culture is people like to go fishing. We're known as the state with 10,000 lakes. Actually, we have over 12,000 lakes, but we have so many lakes in our one state that fishing is really popular, and it's always been a part of our culture. More people own boats per house here in Minnesota than any other state in the United States. And a lot of people go fishing, and we have a thing called ice fishing here, where when the lake freezes over in the winter, we put these little houses or little cabins out on the lake, and we fish through a hole in the floor in the cabin. We have a fishing line that goes down there, and we catch fish while on the ice in a cabin, on the ice in a lake. It's called ice fishing. So fishing is a big deal. So a bullhead is a type of fish, and it's a lot like a catfish. So what he means is, suppose you use night crawlers for bullheads. So suppose you're using worms for this type of fish. And the guy would go, you bet. What do you use? Stinkbait. I made it out of rotten hamburger, moldy cheese with oatmeal for binder. And he goes, well, that's different. Like, you're crazy for using that bait to catch fish. Whereas worms are something that's used a lot in Minnesota to catch fish. To catch fisk. Norwegian. So, yeah. That's one way to use you bet or you betcha. And that's different. see. So that's different is kind of saying, you know, you don't agree, or that's kind of weird. Let's see if I can teach you some more Minnesotan phrases. Whatever. That's kind of a word we say a lot here in Minnesota. And, yeah, I'll write it down. Whatever. And I'll read to you what the book has to say about it. It says, whatever expresses emotional turmoil of many varieties and takes over in Minnesota conversation when you bet and that's different won't do the job. Whatever can be used to express disappointment. Means you're sad with something sometimes when you say whatever. So it says, your work is good, bud. We don't have any complaints, but we're gonna have to let you go. It's the economy. Someone would, you know, obviously they're getting fired from their job. They go, whatever, you know, or whatever. I might say it like that. So whatever can mean like, you know, like I really don't like that, or I really hate that, or I'm sad, or I'm disappointed. But it also too, depending on how you say it in the context, whatever can mean I don't care. Like, whatever. But here's another example. I've been an electrician for 20 years, but I tell you, this house of yours is the worst I've ever seen. I'm surprised you didn't have real trouble long before now. I'm gonna have to replace all the wiring. It ain't gonna be cheap. The person go, whatever. So those are kind of ways to use whatever in Minnesotan English. And we tend to use some, I guess you could say, lots of sarcasm in Minnesota too. Like, here's one sentence. Oh great, just wonderful, terrific, I love it. It really kind of, what you're saying is, you're really pissed off and you hate it. Oh, terrific, I love it. We tend to do that a lot here in Minnesota. So, yeah, this book's pretty cool, and maybe I'll make some different lessons from it. But you got some, you know, funny stuff here in this book. And it talks about, you know, lots of different aspects in the Minnesotan language and stuff. I'll show you some the table of contents, so it shows you the different subjects that it covers. Okay. Now the first chapter is Getting Started in Minnesotan, which basically covers you betcha, that's different, and whatever. And then it also, the next one is The Power of the Negative, which is expressions showing how you're, you know, not feeling good about something. Like, oh, that's terrific. You know, kind of that negative type deal, negative attitude. And then the third chapter is Eating in Minnesota, words related to eating. 4 is basic conversations. 5 is dining out in Minnesota. 6 is what you say when you've arrived somewhere. 7 is talking cars, because there's a lot of mechanics, a lot of car people in Minnesota. Talking about cars is not an unusual conversation. And chapter 8 is on Lutefisk. And chapter 9 is how we write our poetry here and what we do with it. Number 10 is, oh, for and a heck of a deal. Heck of a deal. I like that. I'm going to teach you that one right now. Heck of a deal. What it really is heck of a deal. But the way we say it is more like this. Heck of a deal. That's a heck of a deal. And when someone says, oh, that's a heck of a deal, that's like saying, oh, that's really cheap, or you really save money on that one. Like if you're at a store, you see something on sale and it's a t-shirt that's normally $20, but you see it there for $5, you go, oh, that's a heck of a deal. That's a heck of a deal right there. Or if someone's telling you about how they bought this car for only $100, that's usually $500, and they got it for $100, you go, oh, that's a heck of a deal right there. You got a steal right there. That's a heck of a deal. Good deal there. Those are the types of things we'd say. I always thought that was kind of funny. Then the next chapter after heck of a deal is your winter vacation in Minnesota. And then it goes into the next chapter is books, grants, and fuel oil. The next chapter is Minnesota doctors and hospitals. The next chapter is talking money and road repairs in Minnesota. And the next one is romance and marriage in Minnesota. And the next one would be living off the land. Snowbirds and so then. Living off the land. I should probably show you, kind of explain that one a little bit. That one's kind of interesting. Living off the land it means essentially that you are living like the Native Americans did. That you are not using money, you are not working a job. What you are doing is you are growing your own food, growing your own plants for food, and you are hunting animals. And that's how you're living. That's how you're living by yourself. And up north in northern Minnesota, where my dad goes, we go to a real remote kind of, I guess you could say, town. That's where my dad's side of the family is from, is this area. And it's called Big Falls, Minnesota. And up there, it's all pine forest. And I mean, the nearest hospital is an hour away, an hour drive. And the fun part about being up there, though, is you get a lot of people who mostly live off the land. And what they mean by that is maybe they work a job, they drive an hour and they go to a job, but they grow a lot of their own crops and they do a lot of hunting of the animals for food too. So they're not completely living in this, I guess you could say, civilization of America. They're not quite, fully being like a city person. They live off the land. They don't have jobs. They don't have money. They live off the land. And, it's like the Native Americans. So living like this, is this something that really exists? Like, we're not just saying this for like jokes or stuff, kind of like the Lutefisk. Like, my dad's side of the family is from a very small town in northern Minnesota called Big Falls, and whole area is very remote. It's far away from all the big fancy city life. And out there, the towns are pretty small, like 200 people and that type of thing. That's what Big Falls pretty much is, 200 people. And I have a couple of videos in Big Falls, or like the 4th of July parade and stuff. And it's all pine forest in that area. And a lot of people who live out there, they live off the land, partially, somewhat. And they may have a job, and they may drive an hour to a bigger town or city and work maybe for the weekend or for a week straight, or they work for half the year, not during the winter, during more of the summer and the spring and fall. And then also what they do is they live off the land too. They grow some crops, some corn, or grow some stuff, and they go with a bow and arrow, or they go with a gun. Most people use guns, and they go hunt and shoot animals. And a lot of people in Minnesota, they especially up there, they'll be hunting deer a lot. Even out of the legal deer season, a lot of people hunt deer, and a lot of people, they hunt bear, like black bears. They hunt a lot of black bears, and I've had black bear meat in the past, and it's really good, you see, because black bears, they're omnivores, which means they eat both other animals. They eat meat and they eat plants too. So you get a really sweet tasting meat because they eat a lot of berries, and they like honey a lot too. So a lot of people hunt bear, deer. They hunt what we call partridge in northern Minnesota, partridge. But I guess the regular standard English word is grouse. So we hunt those too, and that's like a chicken that lives in the pine forests. So we hunt those, and those are really good. And at least a lot of people up there hunt them, and they also hunt, various different kind of animals too. But I guess those are the three big ones up there that people hunt, and they're living off the land, so to say. So it's a realistic thing that still like occurs. And my great grandfather did it a lot. His name was Vance. He did it a lot, and even his parents and his grandparents and his great-grandparents, that's what they did. They lived off the land, mostly, if not completely lived off the land. They had their own farm up there, and they tried to grow crops and everything. They're living off the land. So that's one thing that's kind of a common theme in Minnesota. We tend to be more of a hardy people because a lot of them used to live off the land, and some still do. Let's look more, see what the next chapters are on here. So Wyoming, Gulf, and the Law, Minnesota style. The next chapter is Gifts, Rebuttals. And the next chapter is Minnesota Psychiatry. The next chapter is Cassettes, Mysteries, and Customs. The next chapter is Though, Groves, Seniors, and Poker Parties. And then they have a chapter on Minnesota Body Language. And then they have a chapter on Directions, Church, Lake, and Cabin. And the next chapter is I Don't Know and Minnesota Firsts. And then they have a chapter Lists, The Phone, For Sure, Saying Too Much. And then they have a chapter on the Minnesota Long Goodbye. For sure. That's a phrase. Maybe it's unique to Minnesota. If it is, I didn't know. Let's see, 25. Chapter 25. For sure. Oh. Okay, it says, for sure. For sure in Minnesota is in the ballpark with I don't know. You can say I don't know and mean that you do know, but you aren't saying how much you do know. Or more rarely that you actually don't know. Sure, but you're saying you are sure in order to avoid a disagreement, or you're just plain want to get through a murky area of a conversation. That's what kind of for sure is. So you bet, by comparison, is usually a more positive statement of agreement. For sure, or even you got that right, both expresses reservations without going into detail. That's not to say that you can't bet used to divert opinion. For example, where a citizen on a high horse says, here's an example for you. They ought to throw the book at him, sell their property, and give them a one-way ticket out of here. You bet. They ought to throw the book at him means they ought to use whatever laws they can to, prosecute this guy. So that's what they mean by that. Throw the book at him. You go, you bet. And then the for sure is kind of it's not as much in agreement as you bet, but you're trying to avoid a debate or a conversation. Because like I said, in Minnesota, if you got strong opinions, you keep them to yourself usually. And so if someone says a statement and you don't quite, maybe you agree with some of it but not all of it, and you don't really want to talk about that though, you just say, oh, for sure. Or for sure can even be used in a positive statement, like instead of saying just sure to something, like someone says, do you want to go get ice cream? You would say, sure. But if you really wanted ice cream, so someone would be like, do you want to go get ice cream? You'd say, for sure. Like really excited. Like, yeah, for sure. I guess that's one thing us Minnesotans say a lot, is for sure. So, yeah, that's just a little bit on the Minnesotan accent and our dialect in English, and some about our culture. So, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it wasn't too long and didn't make you go boring or nothing. It kept you interested in Minnesota. So I guess that's all for now. You bet.